He works for APU.
Who's that?
He worked for APU. Al Ayresman. He was a professor at APU. Azusa Pacific. Al Ayresman wrote several books. Dr. Al Ayresman, my mentor, and he was APU. He also was an executive at Boeing, so he got a chance to see Boeing.
Nice.
Yeah. So he's nice. Retired now, but he's doing some really awesome work in the area of faith and work. He lives in Seattle.
Wow. Okay. I'll have to look him up.
Great guy.
I'm just barely getting to know people in Seattle. You know, I mean, all the resources and folks who are doing interesting stuff. So these are all new names to me. So.
Al Ayresman, that's his name. Okay, are we live on YouTube, everybody?
We are.
All right. Hello, hello, hello. I don't know if I can see everybody.
No one's here yet.
They're not coming in yet? Okay.
Not yet. I am going to go away now, but I'm here, but you won't see me.
Okay. She's going to disappear on us.
All right. Like the Holy Spirit, she comes and goes as she wills.
Wow. Were you able to watch any of the services today?
I was not able to watch them. I was on Zoom all day long. So I'm going to come back tomorrow and watch them all. I did watch the service with Al Sharpton in Minneapolis.
You did?
Yeah. It was incredible. He was amazing.
Yeah. He's always seems to be on point with some very practical things and some very important things to say. Yeah.
He's a man who's not lost his voice.
No, he has not.
Yeah.
He's not.
Who preached the memorial today?
He did.
Oh, he did?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he actually preached the service today. Okay. Service was quite lengthy, but he preached the service today. So you can also check that out on YouTube as well.
We'll do that.
Yeah. All right, folks are coming in. I see some folks coming in. They'll be in about 3 more minutes. So then we'll get right to it. But yeah, so today I did get a chance to see a little bit of the service today intermittently. And I found out there was a gentleman, Pat, the pastor, who pastors that church that I went to Harvard Summer Leadership School for. It's like a 2-week intensive at Harvard Divinity School for summer leadership program. So his name is Remus. So it's amazing to kind of say, wow, he built a very large work in Houston, Texas, at the church where George Floyd was eulogized from. It's a 24,000 member church.
Wow.
Yeah, it's quite big.
That is quite big. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, sir. And I think we have the YouTube stream on now, so there's some people also going to be looking at from YouTube side. So this is great. I'm glad that we got a chance to do this.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, we got a chance to do this. 1 minute and counting. This is great. Yeah, I guess I got the keys to the kingdom tonight because I'm letting everybody in.
It's all about power.
They must have gave me the power tonight. So see that the admit button is on my side tonight. All right, it's 8:30, everybody. So welcome, everyone. We're here on BLAW Live. This is Bishop Larry Ward from Abundant Life Church. Thank you all for joining me each Tuesday night at 8:30. For those of you who are here, and this is your first time with us, thank you so much for tuning in. And this is just a way of our ministry at Abundant Life sharing on some really important topics around discipleship and our faith and how our faith and life connect. And of course, we've been in the middle of a pandemic, and also we've been in of just a justice pandemic. And it's been something that we are really trying to focus on, helping ourselves as believers to really talk about these issues and also get some biblical perspective about it. And so we've been talking about biblical justice. And last week we had Sean Watkins. This week we have a special guest with us tonight in the person of Reverend Chris Nichols. And it's good to have him with us. And he's going to be talking in just a moment. And as you're coming in, just want to give you a few announcements that remember that you have to make sure that you still continue to be safe by going out with your mask on, making sure you have your gloves and making sure you keep your social distancing. And also just please make sure that you are looking at the website that we have, and also just be mindful that as we transition into thinking about opening and kind of focusing on that. We're not going to do it right now. We kind of just got to make sure that we are keeping everybody safe. So just want to make sure that you know that in the future, for now, at least for a little bit now, we're going to be still going online and doing a lot of our ministry online. And we'll be getting ready, hopefully, at some point to open up, and we'll keep you informed of how that goes. On Sunday, got a really good time that we're going to have together. Please stay tuned and tune in for our stream service on Sunday morning. We'll be celebrating 26 years of ministry, my wife and I, as pastors of Abundant Life. And so we're going to talk about our story. We're going to just take you down a little memory lane and kind of share some things. You could ask questions, and so it's going to be fun. And so we just want to let you know what's coming up. And so thank you so much for joining us tonight. So without further ado, as you're coming in, you can also share. We're going to meet, and I'm going to introduce Reverend Chris Nichols. He's Executive Director of Ministry in Seattle, Washington. And he brings a lot to the forefront. He's a missional leader. He's also played a very key role in working as a regional director in the area of New England and also California, serving students for InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. He's also an ordained minister in the PCA USA organization as a Presbyterian minister and pastor. And he's a great friend, educated, got his theological degree, graduated the same place and the same time I graduated, which is 2019. Wow, 2019. We graduated together at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. He has a Master's of Religion from Gordon Conwell. He's also a historian. He has a Bachelor's of Science degree and a Master's degree. And so we want to just let you know that you have somebody here who really understands and knows, and we're going to be talking about some things that are very important to us as it relates to biblical justice. And so without further ado, I want to present and introduce Reverend Chris Nichols. Hi, Chris, how are you?
Fine, Bishop, how are you? This is good to be here. It's like being home. It makes me yearn for Massachusetts.
Exactly. It's good, so good to see you. So as we're here tonight, we're going to be talking about some things that are going to be probably really hard. In that, we're going to be dealing with kind of what are we going to have to deal with when it comes to this whole issue of racism, and how do we get our hands around this? And as pastors and leaders and members of the body of Christ, what are we going to do about this? So first question I want to just kind of toss out there, just tell us a little bit about your background in working with students, African-American students, and InterVarsity, and your experience with that.
So I spent 37 years with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship in California in 3 different places: Bakersfield, California, the Central Coast of California, and San Diego. And then I moved to New England, who was the regional director there for 16 and a half years. During that time, when I was working in Bakersfield, California, very early on, many decades ago, I began to get to know a woman named Brenda Salter McNeil. And Brenda was a student. She was a staff in Pasadena. She was a student of Fuller Theological Seminary, and really developing her voice and her call to try to help us understand what it means to engage in racial reconciliation. And I remember bringing Brenda up to Bakersfield, which is not known for racial reconciliation. There were areas around Bakersfield that were sundowner towns. And she really began to open my eyes to the questions of race and ethnicity and what that meant. And the thing that I came to, well, there are a lot of conclusions I came to, but one of them was that the issue of race, the issue of racism is so endemic in our culture that we are all infected, and especially on the white side, because we have the power side of the equation. There is no one who's not infected by racism. And I would say it's impossible to be white in America and not be affected by racism. The more I've read, the more I've studied, the more I've understood, the more I'm convinced that's true. Secondly, I've come to the conclusion, especially I worked with students, that the systems that we worked under, and I worked in the university system at all levels, from the community college level up to Harvard University. The systems themselves are put together in a way that makes it incredibly difficult, much harder for students of color, especially Black students, to survive, to have entrance, to survive and to thrive. I did a couple of research projects during my time at seminary at 2 different times. One, interviewing collegiate Black men about their experience on campus. The second project I did years later was talking with young adult men who were Black about their experience in work life. The thing that came out over and over and over and over again was that they had to work 10 times as hard to survive in those environments, not because they were less smart than anybody else, but because the pressures, the cultural pressures around them, the barriers to their experience, the inability of the culture they were entering to acknowledge their presence, created an emotional and social situation for them that made it incredibly difficult for them to continue. So the men I talked to were successful. They graduated this, but there's a cost. So I walked away realizing also in my experience in Cambridge in the Black church, that the Black church experience understands our faith in a way that is critical to how we're going to lead toward hope, toward regeneration, toward renewal, and that the church desperately needs Black leadership. The country needs Black leadership, but the church desperately needs it. So I dedicated myself to saying, what does it mean for me to use the authority and whatever access I have to power to try to promote, encourage, and engage Black men and women and make a way for them into leadership, and to try to change the systems I'm in charge of to both understand how they function culturally, how they should function biblically, but then how to make a way for people in those systems so that God can be glorified. So those are some of the thoughts that come to mind.
Wow. So what really do you feel is happening now as it relates to will Black leadership be able to come to the point where it actually takes its place, where even whites, and I've been told this in conversations, that even when it comes to multicultural expressions in the church, that many of these multicultural expressions may have sprinkles of Black people that are not in any powerful positions or any positions to change, but the culture is still, in the context, is white. Is that fair to say?
Oh, it's fair to say. That's reality. That too often, I live in the side of the church that is much more progressive politically than it is conservative. the thing that I've noticed about white progressives, often who are religious people, and this is an overgeneralization, but is that we love, I should say, to be on the right side of issues as long as it doesn't cost us anything. So we love to march and we love to hold banners. We want to go back to our houses and our jobs and our places so that it doesn't cost us anything and we can cheer people on and then sit back while those continual systems happen. I think in the church, and even in our best situations, what we're looking for too often is multicultural representation, not true multiculturalism as a kingdom expression, because it is about power. What I've heard several people say, and I know to be true, is that if we're going to do something about racism, white people have to step up and do something about it, because we do hold the reins of things that only we can let go of. And it's not the Messiah complex issue, it's the fact that as a white man, where I stand at the pinnacle of too much power and having too many things in my hands, unless I let them go, the kingdom will never flourish. I frankly think it's one of the reasons why much of the white church is dying. But yes, so I think the challenge of the church in particular, the white church in particular, is that we have to come to a place of recognizing that there is a cost. There has to be a cost, but it's what we're inviting to in Mark chapter 8. So we shouldn't be surprised by that, which tells you something about our Christianity. When we're surprised that following Jesus has a cost, it tells you something about the way we've entered into discipleship. So let me just tell you this kind of brief story. At a really difficult time in my life, I was welcomed in the Pentecostal Tabernacle into their prayer meetings. I would be my opinion that PT in many ways saved my life at that moment. And it was in that moment where I was with people when I was really struggling and in pain. I was with people who understood what it meant to be in pain. They understood what it meant to live in a world that didn't like them. And so then I discovered a faith in a way of strength and power that went on in spite of all these oppositional experiences. And I think that's the leadership we need in the church. And I think in the white church too often, we minimize the call to give up your life. And so we want an independent faith, not a personal faith. We want a faith that affirms who we are, but doesn't transform us. We want a faith that reminds us that we're in charge, but actually doesn't move into a place with Jesus where our experience with him, it's like the treasure in the field. Mm. My experience to Jesus should be such that I'll sell everything to pursue him, right? And I think the thing that I'd want to say too is that Mark 8, if anyone would follow me, let them deny themselves, take up their cross and follow me, means something different for you than for me. It is about Jesus. Of course, it's about giving up your life. We have the same call, but we have different places in the culture and society. And for me to pretend that what Jesus is asking you to give up is the same as what he's asking for you to give up is a falsehood and leads us to a place where I try to make you give up more than me. So I have to give up less.
Wow. Wow. So we can read the same text and we can hear the same message, but our interpretation of where we are in the story of giving up our rights and giving up our privileges are just totally different.
Yeah. It is so incredibly difficult when you have so much to let go of it. So much of our identity is what we hold on to. And when you're a person who has power, when you have privilege, when you have stuff, and so there's economic issues here, right? So if you're upper middle class, especially if you're white and if you're male, you have automatic privileges in ways that nobody else does, and you have them without even knowing it. The thought of giving those things up can be at one level terrifying because you're wondering who you'll be when you let them go. And so unless you have a relationship with Jesus that overwhelms that fear, you'll never give them up. You'll just readjust your religion to make sure that what you have stays blessed and on your table.
Wow. Wow. So if that is true, and you're saying it's true and it's a reality, how do we ever get to the point where there is a divestment of power and an investment in others? And as we're looking at Jesus, he really focused his ministry to empower those who were disenfranchised. He came for the poor. He was anointed to preach the gospel to the poor. He met the marginalized, and he did his to give them power and to heal them. And how are we ever going to get to that point where people who have all the power, white people who have much of the power, to really begin to invest that in places that they see poverty and lack? And
Well, I wish I knew the answer to that. I do know that I had an experience with Reverend Virginia Ward a few years ago when I was at seminary and having these incredibly positive experiences at PT and other Black churches. And I had said to her at one point, maybe I should just go work at the Black church. She said, no, the Black church doesn't need you. You need to go back to your own people and teach them what you're learning. I've never forgotten that. And I've considered it a calling to now at my stage of life with my ethnicity and my gender, to be in the church that looks like me and keep bringing up the issues of ethnicity. So I think there is something about education, though the lie of the Enlightenment is that if we just learn enough, we'll be fine. Clearly, that's not true. If that were true, George Floyd wouldn't be dead. But there is something about education and awareness. There's also about empowerment of the Holy Spirit. There's also about the challenge, prophetic challenge of saying we need to make a way. So it has to do with how we hire. So in my experience, am I specifically seeking to hire people of color? Am I promoting them? Am I giving them the same opportunities of education and training? Am I examining how I'm operating? So in those moments when I've hired someone who is of color and they are suggesting or pushing on something that I find threatening, I need enough self-awareness to know when I'm being pushed, something is happening to me inside, when I can recognize this is probably about my identity and not about the issue. And so that I can take time out and deal with Jesus over it and not kind of grip and say, no, I need to hold on to my power. I don't know how else to do this. I mean, I do think that we need to think about who we're electing.
Yeah.
There are police issues we must address. I am, as a side note, against the militarization of the police. I think it's a huge mistake. I think we need to really explore the options that are coming up. So I think those are real issues. I think we need, well, I'm going to say this, and you can cut it out later, but we need someone different in the White House. That's distressing to me. So there are a lot of things we can do, but at a personal level, and this is where it's really tricky for white people, you can feel like you can get it right on all those public levels, but then you're still not dealing with your own stuff. Right? You're not going deep. And what I've realized is that, so I've been working on this for 40 years, and I find myself now still at times threatened by change that I realize is about the way I understand my identity as a white man. And it's shocking to me how deep that sin goes. And Jesus has to keep working at it. We have to keep going deeper and deeper to say, how do we pull that sin out? How do we find that healing? This is a deep wound. So, yeah.
Yeah. That's really great. And what I'm thinking about, and you and I had an experience together, where we were talking to a group of pretty much white evangelicals, predominantly men, and we were actually going through the book, The New Jim Crow. And I invited you to this meeting because I'm the only African-American male on this particular board at the time. And when we talked about this whole understanding New Jim Crow, first of all, I said, I'm going to invite somebody in to talk about the systems that that are in place right now are racist, and they are not promoting equality among minorities and among people of color. And they thought I was going to bring a black guy. So I said, I'm going to bring this guy. He's going to talk about this. But I already knew that it's important for white people and white leaders to talk to white leaders. And when you got there, it was kind of like a denial that the systematic racism even exist. Yeah. What was your thought on that? What was your reaction? Because you heard it just like I heard it.
Yeah, I have very distinct memories of that meeting. First of all, I was actually surprised by the level of anger in the room. These guys were angry that we were bringing it up. So they attacked the book. They didn't attack you, but they just tried to tear the book apart. They wouldn't admit that there were any systemic issues. So I remember having three reactions. One is this deep level of disgust, which is tempting for when you're the white guy who supposedly is woke, right? It's really easy to turn on people who look like you because then you can feel superior, and that's the devil. So I remember being tempted to that so that I wouldn't have to be associated with these people, because that's part of the shame. You look at your people and you realize we're doing this. This is why we're not making progress. Secondly, I remember being really discouraged that we could never get to a real conversation about the brokenness we were trying to address. Thirdly, I remember thinking we have lost sight of the gospel in this conversation. Now we're talking about religion and holding up our place in a religious context. This isn't the gospel anymore. And I remember being at a loss and not sure how to engage it. One of the things that I've been trying to do in the last 2 years particularly, and this probably was helpful, I studied under Dr. Emmett Price and Gordon Conwell through the Institute for the Study of the Black Christian Experience. And he's an incredible mentor. And he taught me how to try to listen better so that I could respond to what was being said and what was not being said. And I wish I had studied with him before that. But I remember not being sure how to engage folks. I was just at a loss. And I walked away thinking, if this is the example of the church community that we're supposed to be engaging with, Jesus, I don't know how you're going to change this. This is really discouraging. But I also know that the power of the Spirit, the work of Jesus, is always going to be pushing out us beyond our own people groups, always. So if we reduce ourselves, especially those of us who are white, holding up our enclave and always being the superior power monger that welcomes people in, but then keeps them in the corner, the Holy Spirit will leave us. I think Jesus will abandon us. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that was a long, I'm not sure I answered your question, but.
Yeah. I mean, it was just, how did you feel about that? For those of you who are out there, we're going to ready to open up and ask you to put some questions in the chat box for Reverend Nichols, and we're going to have him just answer some questions if you have it. So I'm going to ask him a quick question here. It might be a little tough one, but I'm going to ask him a quick question and get his opinion on it. And so while I'm asking this question, he's answering, you can actually put your question in the chat box and we'll ask him your questions. So, Chris, here's a question that I heard African Americans say. You know, there is certainly a tiredness, an anger, a rage when it comes to this whole situation with regards to injustice that was committed against George Floyd and others. And we saw a police officer murder him, among others. And I have heard this statement over and over again where people are so angry and they're tired. They're saying, I ain't telling white people no more. I'm done talking to white people. I'm not going to talk to them about nothing. I'm through talking with them. What would you say that we do about this? Because I think if we stop talking, if we stop trying to talk, I'm not too sure what's going to happen. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think for one thing, what I'm suspecting some of those folks are saying that they're tired of educating white people. They're tired of white people coming and saying, what am I supposed to do? What's my next step? So I think that's justified. I don't think Black people should be the educators of white people on these issues. So I feel like part of my job, and many people like me who are distressed, overwhelmed, horrified, sick over the lynching we saw over George Floyd, our job is to begin to educate people who look like us, to press people for change, to call people together, to get people thinking, to press into that. I think that's the first thing. And I think the second thing is that what we've been trying to do in our church, we just finished a series with two other churches, a Chinese evangelical church and a African-American church. We call it Kindred. We do small groups together, and we've been reading Sarah Shin's book, Beyond Colorblind, trying to help our congregation and our staff begin to learn and to be educated. I think we have a lot of work to do on our own. And I think we need to, as white people who have some awareness, we need to step into the place of Black brothers and sisters who are constantly being asked. So I think that's justified. I think secondly, then, we need to figure out what kind of dialogue at the right time. So let's just take a side comment here. We really need to talk about the effects of trauma. Trauma is a real thing. And I'm very concerned for my African-American brothers and sisters who are experiencing just another layer of trauma. And there's got to be, we just can't ask people to be traumatized all the time. Come into my dialogue, oh yeah, and set your feelings aside and come talk to me. We have got to allow there to be some space for healing and space for that conversation when they're ready to engage. So as a white leader, I have a lot of work to do with people who look like me, to engage them, to press, to be prophetic, to try to push, to educate. But then I need to make the right kind of spaces for the kind of conversation that allows people to speak their minds and be clear without re-traumatizing the conversation. Mm. And then I think there's a place where, as white community, we have to demonstrate we're serious. And I think it's the thing that has been so overwhelming in this whole process. You begin to wonder if we've made any progress at all. And what's the step we need to take to show we're making some kind of progress? So when I ask someone who's Black to enter into a conversation, I've demonstrated I'm actually serious about doing something about this, and not just having a conversation. That's the other thing. In the white progressive world, talking feels like doing something. So you just have endless panels and conversations or demonstrations, and you never do anything. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. Here's a question for you. The question is, what would you say to a white evangelical leaders who just want to do something, especially if they are in denial about what the real issues are? And what resources would you recommend that Black people suggest to white people who are trying to learn?
Well, let me start with the white person. I'd say first to the white evangelical, you have a lot of catching up to do. This is not a 10-minute fix. There's some history you need to know about. So I always start people, white evangelicals particularly, with the book Slavery by Another Name, which is a history of post-Civil War and re-enslavement of Black people. The shocking fact, there's so many shocking things in that book, but the most shocking one to me when I finally read through the whole thing was that the last civil case against slavery happened in 1941. There was a man in Texas who had enslaved a Black man, taken to court, found guilty, and fined $500.
Wow.
1941. When was
Wow.
the end of slavery? 1941, not 1865. So what I want to do with white people is say, you need to read about our history. You need to understand how we've gotten here. Because the history often white people read has little to nothing to do with how our country was built. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that I want to help. I would say to the white evangelical, I have a couple of people I want you to listen to. One of them is the Reverend Dr. Isa Macaulay. He's at Wheaton College. He's an Ephesians scholar. He has a new book called Reading the Bible While Black. It's not out yet. He's fantastic. There's a lot of great stuff online. I would want them to start listening to him and the things that he's talked about. The third thing I say is you really need to read James Cone and Under the Lynching Tree, something like that.
Yeah, that'll make you cry.
Well, it's essential, right? Unless you can understand what the cost has been, you actually can't engage in this conversation. It's a white characteristic to want a quick fix. I just want to fix it and move on. That's the problem. So I want to say to my evangelical brothers and sisters, you have to sit down. You have to sit in this. And the last thing I would say to them is the danger for when you're white, even if you feel this passionately, if you're concerned about these issues, that we can always walk away. We get too stressed about things, then we can blend into the world and the world fits us great. We don't have to, so our blood pressure doesn't go up. We don't get more diabetes. We don't suffer from all these other diseases because we're not under that pressure all the time. That should not be an option for us. You have to sit and lament and understand what it feels like. So I would encourage those folks to go back and watch and listen. So there's a journey. It's a discipleship journey that white evangelicals must take. They want to do something, they've got to go here. And they need a white mentor who's going to help them process. They're not ready for a black mentor. They need a white mentor. I would say to our black brothers and sisters, when they have white friends coming to them, there are three things I think that they can tell white people to do. One, they need to look up their own resources. There are resources everywhere. Ta-Nehisi Coates, for instance, tremendous stuff. Obviously, James Cone. I could go on. I mean, there's just Woke Church. The book White Awake is really helpful by Hill. It's another really helpful book. I would say to your white friends, you need to go look online for resources about racism. And you can write in Christian resources about racism. I would encourage also that they say you should read the book Beyond Colorblind. That's a great entry point for everybody who's white. And then if they have enough relationship, they need to be able to say to that white person, I want to help you, but I can't be your mentor. You need to understand how difficult this is. I can't be the person to help you. And I think that is appropriate.
Wow. That's very helpful. And I would even talk about the new Jim Crow. I think
absolutely.
The new Jim Crow is just something that just kind of will make you kind of shiver.
Yes, absolutely. I totally forgot about Michelle Alexander's book. Yes,
Michelle
absolutely.
Alexander, she'll make you shiver on that one.
Yeah.
Thank you. I got a question here. A few more questions. What do you think is going to happen long term? Because as you said, it's not going to be a short term fix. Long term, 5 to 10 years from now, if you kind of peer into the future, what do you think is going to happen? Is this going to just be another really good rally feeling moment, or is this going to cause us to really make some change? And what would that look like?
Well, I would love to say, yeah, I'm sure it's going to bring a lot of change, but I'm really old and I've seen this come round and round and round. So it's really discouraging to me. I don't want to be a naysayer, but I just, I don't know. I think there's a possibility that in some places around the country, there could be changes in the police force. I know that's a lot is happening here. One of our black pastors here is on the civilian commission overseeing the police, and he's one of the co-chairs.
Hmm.
We have our police chief is Black, and she's finally, I think, getting the support she needs to try to bring real change to the police force here. It's really tough. So I think it's a possibility there could be some of that change. Unless, I don't want to become overly political here, but unless we make a radical change in our national government, we are going to continue to find someone who is creating separation, division, and opportunity for people to hide behind their own racism. That has to change. I think it's critical that it change locally, professionally. I think COVID-19 is giving us more opportunity to make changes in the education system, and that we are operating in multiple ways that we even know. And so that we have more flexibility now to make changes in how we understand discipleship, how we understand evangelism. So I just was talking to our directors yesterday, presenting with James Chung's gospel outline, the big story, because it allows you to understand how Jesus has come to reclaim us so that he might redeem the world. It allows justice to be an intimate part of the gospel. So I think in the church, we need to change how we talk about the gospel and evangelism. We shouldn't withdraw from evangelism, because the only way this possibly can change if people have a deep conversion experience. I am not on the side of the church that thinks, well, we just need to have some more social activism. We're just going to burn ourselves out, but we need to be engaged with the Jesus. Our pastor preached this incredible sermon last Sunday out of the raising of Lazarus. And he said, if you want to know where Jesus is at the grave raging. He's with his friends weeping. He's on the streets marching. He's beyond the grave rising. And as I look at how we think about the gospel outlines, how we teach about evangelism, I think COVID-19, and this is our opportunity, if you have any authority in the church at all, this is the way we begin to make those changes.
Mm. Wow. This is another question that comes about. They said the question is, I'm in an interracial marriage, both very strong in our faith, okay, but needing some assistance in discussing the anger and the hurt that the country is feeling right now. And so where can we begin to discuss how to deal with this spiritually?
Well, yeah. I'm sorry that my answers are so convoluted. I mean, I just don't think there are any easy answers, but
there are none. This is the tension points for all of us as leaders. There's a lot of tension points.
Yeah. Well, I think for one thing, I know a number of interracial couples at our church, and I think you have to get to a place where you're saying, this is how I feel. This is what it feels like in this moment. And it's the great communication skills, right? Rather than saying you shouldn't feel that way, but this is how I feel at this moment. So that we can figure out where we're starting from. Because it's hard to go to a spiritual place if we don't know what we're bringing into the spiritual conversation. I think for lots of Christians, they want to go to a spiritual conversation. They think they can leave themselves behind, but that just sneaks in and erupts in the conversation. So I think to say, this is how this feels right now. This is what I'm thinking. This is what my experience is. And to have listening patterns, which is going to be very familiar to you.
Yep.
So it may be that one person speaks, there's 30 seconds of silence. The other person reflects what they're hearing the other person say. There's 30 seconds of silence. The other person speaks, so that at least you're hearing each other. Then I would say that for a couple, an interracial couple, for whatever the lighter skinned person is, if they're white, that I think they need to find a white mentor who understands these issues so they don't go to their spouse for education. So if there's the Black person, if there's a Black and white couple, the African-American, the African, the dark-skinned person in that marriage, they can't be the educator for their spouse.
Well,
Spouse needs to be listening and engaging, but that person needs a mentor who can help them interpret what's going on, and they can say things in that context that would be incredibly hurtful to their spouse.
Hmm.
I think that's really important. The other thing I'd say is that I want to go back to the question of lament. I think we need to know how to weep and wail and cry together. Deep empathy for how messed up this is. I just don't know how, unless we get there, it's just so hard to have these conversations. And then I think there may be conversations couples could have, set questions about, tell me about your experience. Tell me about your personal history. What's this like for you in this moment? So you can share an experience and really listen to each other. That's not very helpful, but a few steps maybe that could help.
thank you. That's really good. That's really good. Thank you. So please keep the questions coming. If you have a question, we only have about 20 minutes left. I'm going to sneak a question in here while they're typing in. You know my sons. You know
Yeah.
both of my sons. You talked to both of my sons, and one of the things that my wife and I, Virginia, has done, we have to talk to our kids a lot about how to be a Black man in America. How to be a Black man in America. And I know that as young people are being raised in their families, and I'm wondering, is the conversation going to need to change? Or is the conversation going to remain the same? My sons are now 28, 30. And one thing that Paul said that I was really hoping that he'd be wrong to the core. When they asked the question, we did an interview on WGBH, a short interview with our family, and he was asked the question, do you think that body cameras and having and filming the police, if they should stop you, is going to change anything with regard to police brutality? He said no. He said because eventually they're going to be able to film a police officer's killing us in the street. He said that 5 years ago. And when he said that, I called him and I said, I'm so sorry. I didn't want you to be right, but I thought we were way beyond this. So what do we tell? Is the narrative going to change when we're going to tell our young people, our young Black men and women, you got to watch out because they're out to get you?
Well, this is the one I think that haunts me a lot. Every time I see a Black man or woman killed, I think about Paul and Mark, because they're just a couple years younger than my sons, and we've lived kind of parallel lives, right?
Yep.
So growing up in the church, our sons all went to elite schools, all graduated, all working, all responsible, all doing really well. I never had to talk to my white sons about being white in America. And every time I see something happen, I think about Paul and Mark living for fear what might happen to them. So one of the things that's happening that I could be a hope for change, I have two grandsons who are 5 and 3. And their parents have just asked us to recommend chapter books about boys and girls of color, so that their son can read books in his shelf that are about kids who don't look like him. It's really critical. So we just had 7 books arrive. We're reading through them, try to look and think what would be helpful to him. He has a cousin, my daughter-in-law's brother's wife is Black. So he has cousins who are Black. So it's critical that my grandsons understand these issues now when they're 5 and 3. I think it's critical at church that we tell stories, that we try to understand how we begin to build bridges in our children, give them a greater awareness. But I think we have to attack this issue from multiple sides. And I think so from the kind of older side is that we attack it from both what we provide for places where we have authority, training, education, where we vote, where we have influence, demanding some kind of change. But I also think we have to work to protect young Black men particularly, until the day when we can be reassured somehow that they're in a safe space. I don't know what the answer is. It does terrify me. It really does. And
Yeah, it is terrifying because at the same time, I'm trying to make sure I stay alive.
Exactly. Well, that's the other thing. So you're worried about your sons, and now every time you get in a car, so one of the elders at our church is African American. He's an engineer at Boeing. So we were in the conversation last week, and he was saying that, but I don't know, 3 months ago, probably less, he was driving, well, it was before COVID, so it's probably 5 months ago. He was driving down to Boeing. It's probably a 20-minute drive for him. 4:30 in the morning. He's stopped by 4 police cars.
Wow.
He always wears his Boeing insignia. So it's the routine. Wallet and keys on the dash, hands on the dash. The guy is a senior engineer at Boeing. He said the only thing he could think of was, it's too dark for anyone to film. That's just gut wrenching, right? So I'm almost speechless. I don't know, how do you help our children survive when our friends need to survive, when every time, so I don't know what that answer is. We obviously can't stop, but it's horrifying. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, thank you for trying to answer that question. Here's a question that came up in the chat box. It says, can we move toward truly multi-ethnic worship communities, given the need for repentance and education from white folks and healing for Black people and other POCs? Like this question. And with such different needs, and how can we really come together and honestly? So that's a question that comes up. How can that really happen?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I think there's a certain level of idealism in me that would like to believe that we can have truly multicultural, multi-ethnic churches. And I think what is possible is that we can have one culturally dominant space that actually makes room for other people and recognizes their presence and allows their presence to be known and influence the system. I think we're always going to need multicultural, single ethnic communities. So I know that Abundant Life is actually a multicultural community. It's a single ethnic community in some ways, but it's a multicultural community. We're going to continue to need those spaces. But what we do in those spaces is really critical. I think we can be multiculturally sensitive. I think we should be able to read the scriptures from really an international lens, a sense of understanding what God is doing at a broad base, seeing where ethnicity and race fits into the scriptures. We need to be able to continue to teach about justice in all of our churches. One thing that's been interesting to watch in our kindred partnerships is that we have these 3 churches: African American, white dominant, Chinese dominant. All those churches have some multi-ethnic mix in them. But when you're coming together for folks where one player is trying not to be dominant, then you have a space where people can actually have conversation and build relationship. That's been really helpful. So one of the things that's been interesting when I did this research project with young Black professionals, that many of them had left multicultural churches, multi-ethnic churches, big churches because they realized over time that the church actually wasn't multicultural, that it was representational, but it wasn't multicultural.
Right.
And it just became exhausting. And so most of the Black men I knew went into Black churches. Now, that's not to say that there's obviously a huge range of the Black experience. And so I know lots of Black men who are raised in a more diverse environment or white environment, and they're more comfortable in that. And that's fine. I'm just saying that let's not pretend what it is and what it isn't. So there may be a day, but I think we need to keep working toward teaching what we know is true in the scriptures, even if our churches remain mono-ethnic or at least monocultural.
That's great. It's one of the things that I've kind of just going to even just toss out to you, that I think that it's important that we as believers in Christ see that the scriptures have to find its way back to be authoritative.
Yes.
I don't believe the church that we have now in terms of Big C church, everybody believes that the scriptures are, that everybody believes that they're authoritative.
That's right.
In many respects, that we all understand that we're coming under the lordship of Christ. And to some degree, we have gotten distracted with a lot of social action oriented activities to the, kind of tossing aside the importance of discipleship, transformation of the life of the believer, and how does that work itself, our faith in life, how does that connect to every area of our lives? And so I think the church has some work to do, and we have some work to do as pastors to bring people back to, let's understand these scriptures are authoritative, and when we don't come under the submission of Christ, bad things happen.
Yep.
Like
absolutely. Absolutely. And that should be a warning to us. A warning to us. There's a prophetic word in that. Bad things happen when you don't put yourself under the authority of Christ, because then you're under your own authority, or you're giving way to the evil one. And those bad things will always happen in that direction. There's hope for redemption under the lordship of Christ. There is no hope of redemption without that.
That's good. So let's look at, if you have any more questions. I'm sorry, I didn't realize that POC is people of color. Okay, so they interpreted that for me. Not a good guy sometimes with acronyms, you know what I'm saying?
I understand.
So here's a question. The next generation is attempting to lead this movement. What do you see for the other generations? That is a very good question.
Well, let me. There's a particular challenge. So I think every generation has its own challenge, right? So I think what I've noticed in our church, so we're a relatively big church, 2,300 people, skews to the older side. I've noticed that some of the oldest people in the church have been the most open to change. I think they feel like they have less to hang on to. It's the folks in their mid 40s to mid 50s that are struggling the hardest. They're either white progressives who are determined that Jesus fit their social agenda and enable them to live exactly the way they're living, or they're hyper-conservative and they want Jesus to bless their social agenda and encourage them to live the same way they're living.
Wow.
Notice how those two ends of that spectrum look exactly the same.
Yep.
So I think it's when the folks who have power and money, and I'm speaking from the white perspective here, they're the ones who are going to have the hardest time. I think the younger generation, there are two things. One is that they've grown up in a more diverse world generally, right? High school, elementary school, college, that's to the advantage. And they lived in a global world to some extent. Huge advantage. Disadvantage. That younger generation that's trying to lead that movement often is relatively biblically illiterate. And so they simply take on the culture around them and try to Christianize, just like their parents. It's just the religious end of the other end of the spectrum. How do we help that generation become deeply biblically grounded with deep humility to lead this thing further? Thirdly, that generation is going to need access, they're going to need money, they're going to need time. So for those of us who are older, how do we space for them to both receive the education, the space they need, the salary they need, the position they need to make a change? The mistake we mustn't make is believing that just because you're a certain age gives you, especially when you're young, exceeding wisdom. It also doesn't mean you're stupid. So there needs to be a balance there. But here's the danger. The radicals of the 60s and 70s became the conservatives of the 80s and 90s.
Wow.
The people who were protesting the Vietnam War, they were out marching in the streets, they were burning in Watts. They became the folks that moved out to the suburbs and became conservative because they just burned out. We don't want this generation to simply become agitators without something to sustain them. So how do we sustain them with something deep in the gospel that will help them run the race to the end? And how do we keep running with them? So
Wow. That's mind-blowing, because it's kind of what I constantly was talking to a number of young people about, that this isn't just the incident. This has been a story. You're part of a story that goes forward, and hopefully you'll see it sometime where it's not going to be the same thing over and over again.
yeah.
But I'm not, you know, Sean was talking about that last week, where he was very concerned because he didn't know if they had enough stamina.
Yeah.
If there was enough stamina and there was enough stick-to-itiveness. And Al Sharpton also made comments about that today. He said, there's a whole lot of people on camera. There's a whole lot of people marching. He said, but when they start seeing how long it may take for even, you know, sentencing these police officers, that could be a long process right now. And will they still be there, or will the numbers dwindle? Will they be there? You know, and remember, they're the ones that held up the signs and stood for hours.
Yeah.
But yet over time, you know, it just kind of dissipated and went back to nothing.
And I think we partly have to be the people to keep cheering them on, giving them the depth, saying, come stand with us, we'll come stand with you, to sustain that.
That's good. But for those of you who are here, we got 2 more minutes. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. Chris, I want to thank you for being a part of this conversation. We're going to try to pick this up again next week. And guess what? We're going to have Dr. Nicole Martin on.
One of my favorite people in the whole world.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
Dr. Martin's going to be on next week. And I think she's gonna do a really bang up job, super job. You did a great job. Sean did a great job, and I'm glad that, you know, our paths cross. I want to thank my wife for really helping us get together, and Tonya, thank you so much for being a part of this consistent effort to help us in the technology area, and all of you tonight. Thank you so much for being a part of this, and let's keep our dialogue going. But remember, pray. We are God, Jesus disciples, and so we have a high calling. We do have a God that's able to change hearts, and so we don't want to lose hope. We don't want to come to a position where we just say it is hopeless, because God said He can do all things, and there's nothing impossible with God. So we're still in the fight. We're still going to stay encouraged. Pray with others, encourage others, and those that need an example, be the example for them. And I just want to thank you again, Reverend Nichols, for being a part of this wonderful discussion tonight. And so,
my pleasure. It was a privilege to be here.
I want you to hang around for a bit. So we want to say goodnight to everybody. Thank you so much for being a part of it. God bless. Have a good evening, everyone, and be safe. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. It's great. It's great.
You ask really hard questions. Oh,
I-
my God. You asked a couple of questions. I thought, are you kidding me? Really?
Oh,
You can ask me that question? Wow.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to show shock you, but I trust your knowledge and I trust your wisdom. And you know what I also trust? I trust the fact that if you don't know, you say you don't know.
Yep.
That's the main thing I trust about it too. When you say you don't know, you said you don't know. And that's
Well,
good.
No easy answers, man, you know? I mean,
None.
it's just so it's really hard for me when you talk about Paul and Mark and then talk about you.
Yeah.
That just really does haunt me. I think about them a lot. And
Yeah.
hey,
Hey, very
I know you.
Great job.
It was a great job.
Well, I was saying your husband asked really hard questions.
Yeah, he did. He did.
Wow.
Yeah. A couple of those were mine, though.
Thanks a lot, Virginia.
It was called.
Interracial one was mine.
It was,
Oh,
good.
Yeah.
It was,
thank
it was
you.
called.
Total
Let me
setup.
get him back.
Are you still live
Yeah.
on YouTube? Are we still live on YouTube?
Oh,
I think we are.